about 6 years ago for the FSC conference, I thought it'd be really great to have a behavioural scientist speak at the conference. And I was quite excited to discover that the Behavioural Insights team had a small satellite office in Wellington. So I reached out to a man named Lee McCauley, and we caught up for a coffee. And the challenge that I had was that the Behavioural Insights team is very focused on helping governments and non-government organisations to help consumers make better decisions for themselves. So I had to convince Lee that the financial services industry weren't the devil, and we are here also to do our best to help consumers. Now, I was very lucky to have Lee come and present at that conference, and 6 years later, I'm really excited to have him back again. Lee has since had time as a director at PwC and has now got his own firm, TIC Consulting. He's going to ask you the question, have you ever let your bias get the better of you? Please welcome Lee McCauley.
Thank you for that very kind introduction, Mark, and thank you to all of you for taking the time to be here, and for the organisers for inviting me. So my pitch to you is very simple today. I want to get you excited about why you need to think like a behavioural scientist, why some of the approaches, tools, techniques are important and useful to you. I have 15 minutes for this, and so I'm actually going to get you to do some of the work rather than just me, and we'll talk a bit about that in a moment. So the word bias in itself is a bit loaded. Now, we all are biased in some way or other. We all bring with us our own baggage, our own kind of conceptions, our own perspectives of things. In a way, bias is just another term for mental shortcuts, and there are lots of labels and lots of ways that that stuff gets described. Not all of them necessarily positively either, and there's a lot to say that people are not rational and they're not making the right choices for themselves. Now, Mark just mentioned the book Nudge, and really at the core of that, one of the main messages from it, and I think something that many of you be familiar with the book, hopefully. But one of the main messages there is our environment influences our choices. They talk about choice architecture as a term, and choice architecture is incredibly influential in influencing your behavior, your decisions. As far as I'm concerned, I'm really interested in what people do. So behavioral insights is a focus on what people do. There we go. Not just on what they think or what they feel or their mindsets, but really getting into the granular detail of what is it that people do and how do we influence that, encourage that. Now, that matters for consumer prosperity and resilience, whether you buy insurance, whether you put a bit more in your KiwiSaver, whether you spend it all on a nice car, as mentioned earlier. And so it's very clear that there are people in this room who've thought about some of the concepts from psychology. I've seen it referred to in some of the breakout sessions. It was even in a New Zealand magazine, as I was reading on the way up, an advert from a financial services provider talking about some of the different ways that our psychology affects our financial decision-making and how you might overcome them. As far as I'm concerned, I'm really interested in this and using behavioral insights to solve complex problems, to try and think about this in a kind of big picture, in a strategy, in a policy setting way, as well as just about the brass tacks of do you buy that product or choose A over B and that kind of stuff, although it is valuable and useful even for those things. At a very basic level, when Richard Thaler was advising the behavioral insights team at the start and being asked, sort of, what do you do? How can we get people to make right decisions for themselves? One of his core questions was, well, have you made it easy for them to do it? And if there's one message that I would give people, it's that making things easy increases the chances that they will do that thing. And it's very nice to see that, at least in the financial services industry, we've moved a little bit away from the idea of kind of let's just focus on literacy, let's just increase knowledge, and that by increasing that knowledge, people will follow and do the right thing, whatever that right thing is, that they will instead that we actually need to think about capability. We need to think about financial behaviors, not necessarily about knowledge. And if I think about myself, whether I eat a pie or whether I go to the gym or not, is probably not going to be influenced by another education course or a leaflet or watching a YouTube video. It's about my environment around me, what others are doing, how the social influences affect me. As I said, though, I don't want to just stand here talking, so I want to get you to do something, which normally when presenting, I would say put your phones away, but actually I'm going to ask you to take your phones out, and we're just going to do a little quiz. Many places I've worked love a kind of morning tea quiz as a way of kind of connecting and getting a bit of a conversation going. So if you just scan the QR code, it's going to take you to 3 simple questions. Okay, so the first question that I've asked is just to gauge confidence, but there is a little bit of a twist here, and I'm really glad that this has worked, because at the core of my work is a humility that we don't always know how people are going to behave, and we don't always have the right answers, and we want to test and we want to experiment, trial. In IT world, lots of people are familiar with A/B testing. That's pretty basic. Now, you might see that there are some slightly different things on the 2 slides there. That's because people who scanned the code on that side got a similar but slightly different question set than the ones on that side. So over here, I was asking, how confident are you compared to the typical New Zealander? Over here, compared to the people in this room. Now, in both cases, quite confident, very confident, seems to score pretty highly. Nice to see a bit more humility, that the people on this side of the room were only about, what was it, that's what, 65% are either quite confident or very confident that they're better than average compared to the people in this room. Now, it might be that you guys are smarter than the people who did this side, but it's very common that we have an overconfidence innate in us, and we think that we are better drivers, better looking, better at making decisions. It's actually a great driver of people doing and trying things. We wouldn't start businesses if we actually thought about what the base rate is of how often businesses fail, for instance. And I say that as somebody who's got my own business, right? This side was compared to the average New Zealander, and I would have expected that in a room of finance professionals, you ought to feel more confident than the average New Zealander. Having said that, I think if I had a room of average New Zealanders in here, most of them would also be more confident that they are good at making decisions. And that affects things like trading behavior, for instance, and willingness to, I can pick a stock, I'm smart, I've read this thing, I've done my research. And sometimes that can be to their detriment. I did some work for the FMA around the COVID response, and lots of people switched into conservative funds as the market tanked. And even talking to some people here at this conference, they've observed similar reaction just in the past few weeks following the drop in the Japan stock market, the Nikkei. How are we doing? Okay, so this is super interesting. Now, you did get slightly different framing again for this question. Basically the same premise, that you've got a substantial inheritance, life-changing amount of money. Do you want to invest? On this side, we talked about a 95% chance that, or was it this side? Yeah, no, this would be 95% chance of doubling your money. This was a 1 in 20 chance that you would lose it all, but otherwise double it. So just a slight difference in framing, which refers back to work by Kahneman and Tversky around what's called prospect theory. And basically, the expected value of both of these is exactly the same. You have exactly the same amount. And not one of you would have been worse off than you are today by the decision to invest. A 95% chance of doubling your money. So if you think about this from a kind of betting point of view, from an investment point of view, it's a no-brainer. You have to invest in this. A 51% chance that you would double your money and a 49% chance that you wouldn't is still positive and still worth investing. Yet, in both cases, a lot of people were reluctant, and especially when you framed it in that negative way around the chance that you would lose this substantial amount of money. And that's our minds playing tricks on us, effectively. The last question, it's interesting. So we've got Fund B is the most popular on this side, and interestingly, it is also on this. Now, this is a shout out to my former colleagues at Behavioural Insights who first pulled this graph together. It's very common, and I've run this in workshops before, and people often go for B. Now, I have a bit of bad news for you, those who did, because that was Bernie Madoff's feeder fund that you all chose. And you lost it all in the global financial crisis. And I'd just like to refer you back to your confidence that you had in your ability to make good financial decisions. We have a room full of very confident people, most of whom have just lost everything. So thank you for joining in with that and participating. So I'd like to give you just 3 very quick takeaway points. And I am going to be part of the Meet the Professionals shortly, sitting down there. So if you want to have more of a conversation about this, come and join me down the corner. And Mark will tell you about all the other great people to talk to as well, though. So I don't want to hog the room. But can we get it to move? Here we go. So behavioral science will help your customers make financial decisions that are better. I've done quite a lot of work recently with inland revenue, looking at different aspects of the customer journey, the customer experience there, and I can tell you that some things they do pretty well, but there's a lot of room to improve as well, and some real value that can be added. I would also, though, encourage you to think about this not just from an external point of view, but from an internal one. So trader decisions are an example, but also I've heard a lot about equality, bringing diversity of perspectives in, etc. Now, the recruitment process typically goes through CVs and panel interviews. The evidence is astonishingly robust that these are just bias machines, and we basically recruit people who look and sound and are a bit like us, and oh yeah, they'll be a good fit. Now, that doesn't give us the diverse perspectives that we really need to test and to challenge ourselves and to come up with different effective ways of engaging with the people of Aotearoa, New Zealand. And then finally, experiment. At the core of what I do is running trials, running experiments with customers, with others, even on internal processes, and that is the way to really robustly measure whether things work or not. And if you're not experimenting, then you don't know, and you don't know what the return on investment is, you don't know what value you're creating. So thank you very much. That's my time. That QR code is my contact details, and I promise you there are no experiments or funny business with it. And as I said, you're welcome to join me for Meet the Professionals. So thank you. Kia ora.